If you ask an average Muslim, they would say Islam is the perfect system, perfect way of life, governance, family planning, law, culture, everything really. Then you realize you're speaking to said person in the middle of London or Sydney, not in Pakistan or Yemen. And you also realize this person wants all the ideas he believes are perfect, which led to places like Pakistan and Yemen being the places they are, to replace the systems in London or Sydney. There's an insane irony here. And if you drill it down, the question to be asked is, why do Muslims claim Islam creates the greatest societies, but refuse to live in them? Now, the first and most measurable reason Muslims don't move to Islamic countries is painfully simple: economics. You see, for a system that's supposedly perfect, Islamic governance has produced, well, results that are anything but. Let's start with the big picture. Across all 57 Muslim-majority countries, home to over 1.8 billion people, their combined GDP adds up to about 8% of global output. Not 18, 8. Yet, these countries make up over 1/5 of the world's entire population. That alone tells you everything about productivity. The average GDP per capita across the Islamic world is roughly $5,000 compared to the $45,000 to $60,000 range in most Western countries. In economic terms, the West is playing in the Premier League, while the Islamic world is still stuck at Sunday community matches. And then we get to unemployment, especially youth unemployment, which is arguably the most important indicator for social stability. In the Middle East and North Africa, youth unemployment is around 25%, the highest anywhere on Earth, double the global average. Female labour force participation, also the lowest in the world, sitting at around 16%. Not because millions of women don't want to contribute, but because the economic ecosystem simply doesn't allow them to. Even the World Bank describes the private sectors of places like Egypt, Morocco, and Jordan as low productivity, low innovation, and low added value. That means even if you want a job, there aren't many worth having. Then we must talk about governance, or the lack thereof. According to Transparency International, the vast majority of Muslim-majority nations score below 50 out of 100 on corruption indices. Countries like Yemen, Syria, and Libya are near the very bottom globally. Islamic countries, economically, institutionally, and structurally, simply cannot offer what modern migrants are looking for. To put bluntly, the perfect Islamic system only seems to improve people's lives once they have escaped it. Funny how that works. Now, before we get to the next part, if you're enjoying this video so far, please remember to give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider signing up on Patreon, which comes with a ton of perks. The irony of it all gets even better. Once many Muslims arrive in Western countries, these supposedly immoral, godless, decadent lands, they immediately become one of the least economically productive migrant groups. The data is overwhelming, and it points to the other huge factor driving migration: the Western welfare state. Let's start with the basics. Western countries have what is essentially a cradle-to-grave safety net: unemployment benefits, public housing, free healthcare, free education, child allowances, food assistance, integration programs, even language classes. You could argue the West invented an economic cheat code. Even if you fail, you won't starve. Now compare that to most Islamic countries where the unofficial welfare policy is, your family will take care of you, good luck. Even refugees in Muslim countries rely almost entirely on UN aid, not the host government. A Syrian refugee in Jordan or Lebanon gets a food voucher and a prayer. That same refugee in Germany gets housing, monthly cash, school for the kids, medical care, and a path to citizenship. It's not hard to see why people risk crossing continents, and here's where it gets even more interesting. In Denmark, researchers found that when the government cut welfare benefits for refugees by 50%, asylum applications dropped by about 5,000 per year. When benefits were restored, applications jumped back up. That's not speculation. That's causal evidence, a literal controlled experiment proving what politicians politely call the welfare magnet effect. You saw the same pattern in 2015 and 2016. Germany and Sweden, with the most generous support systems, received disproportionately massive asylum flows. Meanwhile, poorer Eastern European countries with no benefits to offer were basically invisible on refugees' maps. And once migrants arrive, the reliance on welfare continues. In Germany, around 70% of working-age Syrian refugees were on social welfare as recently as 2021. In the Netherlands, over 60% of Syrians depended on benefits, compared to just 3% of native Dutch. Switzerland reported that nearly 90% of refugees and asylum seekers were receiving social assistance at one point. Contrast all of this with Islamic countries, especially the wealthy Gulf states. Yes, they have lavish welfare systems, but only for citizens. Migrants, even Muslim migrants, receive none of it. No unemployment insurance, no social housing, no long-term security, and absolutely no path to citizenship, no matter how many decades they stay. You work, you serve, and when the job dries up, you leave. For a religion that claims to have the perfect blueprint for society, it is remarkable how often that blueprint ends with Muslims lining up at the welfare offices of the very kuffar they insist are morally inferior. The perfect system somehow can't feed its own people, but the sinful West can. It's almost poetic. The Ummah, united under a perfect divine system until rent is due, then suddenly it's time to call Germany. And today, in places in Europe and elsewhere in the West, merely pointing this out can get you into a lot of trouble with the law. That's exactly why I use Proton VPN and why I think you should too. They're based in Switzerland, outside the reach of US, EU, UK, and Australian law. They don't keep logs and are built by the same team behind Proton Mail. When the UK passed its surveillance laws, Proton VPN became the #1 app on the App Store. Their stealth protocol beats censorship firewalls. Secure Core routes your traffic through privacy-first countries, and NetShield blocks trackers before they ever reach you. I've used Proton Mail since Australia announced sweeping surveillance laws last year, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it's now essential. If you want to protect your privacy and support this channel, hit the link below to get up to 60% off Proton VPN. All of this doesn't stop at food and housing. Muslims rely on the West for something far more precious and far rarer in the Islamic world: freedom. Not the abstract kind you hear in speeches, the real, practical freedom to live your life without the religious police breathing down your neck. Which is rather ironic too. The West is the only place where a Muslim can wake up and decide whether they want to pray, not pray, fast, drink, date, remove the hijab, wear it, and then tell infidels it was entirely your choice to wear it. This is an irony few will admit out loud. Millions of Muslims migrate to the only societies on earth where they can safely be maybe half a Muslim if they choose. Afghan and Iranian refugees often talk about the relief they feel being able to remove the hijab, go to school freely, or simply walk in public without harassment. Women gain significantly more autonomy. Minorities gain safety. Safety and autonomy not granted to non-Muslims and apostates in their home countries, by the way. The West becomes the escape hatch from the coercive power of Islamic law, a relief valve Islamic countries cannot and will not provide. And yet, alongside this quiet dependence on Western liberties, many migrants carry an entirely different confidence. They don't fear losing their Islamic identity in the West. They expect to preserve it. In London, Paris, Malmö, and Dearborn, large Muslim enclaves allow people to live culturally Islamic lives while enjoying Western freedoms and Western institutions. Halal food, mosques, Islamic schools, and dense community networks recreate mini Islamic societies inside secular nations. In some places, this has even evolved into parallel social worlds where integration is optional. Layered on top of this is something even more revealing, an ideological narrative that has been openly expressed by Muslim leaders for decades. Former Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi once said, "We have 50 million Muslims in Europe. There are signs that Allah will grant Islam victory in Europe without swords, without guns, without conquest. The 50 million Muslims of Europe will turn it into a Muslim continent within a few decades." Algeria's President Houari Boumediene was even more blunt. Millions of men will leave the southern hemisphere to go to the northern one. They'll not go there as friends. They'll go there to conquer it with the wombs of their women. These were heads of state openly describing demographic replacement as a form of civilizational triumph. And versions of this sentiment linger today in many Muslim communities. The idea that Islam's moral superiority will ultimately reshape Europe and North America through population growth and migration, which creates a fascinating contradiction. Many Muslims flee Islamic countries precisely because the West guarantees freedoms they cannot get at home. Freedom from the morality police, freedom from blasphemy laws, freedom from forced religiosity, freedom for women and minorities, and freedom for anyone who doesn't want to live under Islamic social control. But at the same time, a portion of migrants carry a quiet expectation, sometimes a hope, sometimes a belief, that the West will eventually begin to resemble the societies they escaped. It is one of the great contradictions of modern Islamic migration. The problem is when Islamic populations grow inside non-Islamic societies, whether through migration, birth rates, or refugee inflows, the result has very rarely been peaceful coexistence. Lebanon is one of the clearest examples. A delicate Christian-Muslim balance existed for decades until demographic change, fueled partly by the arrival of hundreds of thousands of Muslim Palestinian refugees, shattered it. By 1975, the country descended into a 15-year sectarian civil war that killed over 150,000 people. The old order collapsed because the demographic foundations beneath it shifted. The Balkans told the same story in the 1990s. Bosnia's Muslim population grew into a plurality, and once Yugoslavia split, the country exploded along ethno-religious lines. Serbs, Croats, and Bosniak Muslims each sought control, each feared being ruled by the others, and the resulting bloodshed became one of Europe's ugliest post-war tragedies. Kosovo followed a similar trajectory. A Muslim Albanian population that grew from minority to overwhelming majority eventually demanded independence, triggering another violent conflict. And now, Western Europe is already seeing clear early symptoms, with the USA following closely behind. Segregated suburbs, parallel communities, entire districts where police hesitate to enter. Crime spikes concentrated in precisely the same immigrant neighborhoods politicians assure voters are thriving examples of diversity. Add to that the periodic terror attacks, radicalization pipelines, and endless debates over cartoons, headscarves, and blasphemy, and you start to see why Europe's future looks uneasy. Western countries may believe they are too modern, too enlightened, too developed to repeat Lebanon or the Balkans, but every historical case began with the same confidence and the same demographic shifts. This brings me right back to the question I asked at the very beginning. Why do Muslims praise Islamic societies as perfect but refuse to live in them? After everything we've walked through, the answer becomes almost painfully obvious. People vote with their feet. And when millions of Muslims look at the Islamic world, its governance, its freedoms, its economies, its treatment of women, minorities, dissenters, they quietly choose the West. They may not admit it out loud, they may even insist Islam is the solution to the world's problems, but their migration patterns tell a clearer truth than any sermon. The Muhammad hijabs of the world can yell all they want, but we still see them yelling from the UK, not from Bangladesh. They choose countries built by secularism, individual liberty, science, pluralism, and democratic accountability, not countries built on Islam. And that's the paradox Western societies now face. People flee Islamic governance for Western freedoms, then bring the values of the former into the institutions of the latter. Islam could never have built these countries. So the real question today isn't simply why Muslims move to the West, it's what happens to the West when enough people who fled Islamic societies begin reshaping the very societies they escaped to.
In the neon haze of a broken dawn, steel towers hum, but the wild runs on. A shadow moves through the circuits below, half machine, half beast, with a violet glow. They thought the outback was lost to the flame, but a jingle